Welcome back, Fusion 360 for Woodworkers Part 7. Today we're going to make a start on those drawers. If that sounds good, stick around. I had some feedback on the last lesson that the pace has started to increase a little bit, and that was just leaving a few of you behind. So today we're going to slow that right back down again and start to really break this down one step at a time. Now, the command that people got confused about was the modify command and how I'm using that to actually cut out almost like a router bit. We will be using that again today in this lesson, so I'll slow it right down and hopefully that will work out for you. Now, let me know in the comments as well. I am thinking of creating a companion course. So, Fusion 360 companion course for woodworkers or something like that. What I want to do is to take one command at a time and just do a focused session just on that one command. So it'll be like a reference library of for woodworkers of how to use different commands in Fusion. So the idea is we'll introduce a command as part of the main build. I'll then add to that library with a standalone quick turnaround lesson. So that should give people quick access. Now that's an idea that came back in, and I'd like to understand what you think about that idea as well. So drop a line in the comments and let me know. With that said, let's look at this drawer. So this is where we're up to. Our bookcase is coming on quite well. It looks like a bookcase, doesn't it now? And I want to turn my attention to these drawers. Now the challenge that we have with drawers, it took me quite a long time to nail this one. I want the drawers to not only size as I resize the cabinet, but I want them to keep their position in relationship to the drawers that they sit inside of. And I want to allow inside the model for a clearance fit, which is exactly what we would do if we were building this thing in real life, and that way all the size of the material comes out correctly. Now the way that I solve this is by using constraints. So if I can create a drawer that's constrained to the box it sits in, then that should in theory always resize when I resize the cabinet. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to come in as always, we're going to start by creating a sketch, the starting point for anything we do in Fusion. And I want to come into this front plane. Remember, everything's referenced from this origin plane from the very first lesson that we did. And I'm going to come in and I'm just going to click on that front plane. So the front is nothing more than a rectangle, so let's sketch that in. Come up to the sketch tools at the top, 2-point rectangle. Now straight away you'll notice my little black cursor is not snapping into anything, and that's because we're drawing on the front plane. Now that's going to give us a problem because we can't connect to anything. So let's just come out of the sketch, because I know what you're saying, why don't I just select an object, just deleting that sketch that we've made. Now I'll come in again with the sketch, and this time I'll select this front edge here, click on that. Now you can see I'm now drawing on this plane to be more precise on this side panel component. And yes indeed, look, I can now snap to that component. But the problem I've now got, yes I can snap down there, but I can't connect anywhere else. Now that's because when you select an object to draw on, you can only draw on that object. You can see it'll quite happily snap to the side of that panel, but that's no good to us. I have no way of selecting multiple objects to draw to, so I can't constrain this in a traditional way. Let's finish that sketch. I'm going to come back in and delete that sketch because we don't want it. Okay, now we're going to come back into the idea of sketching on our front plane, so we're going to sketch on that front plane. Now the way around this is we just create an object somewhere on this front plane, and I'm just going to do it there. It doesn't matter what size it is, it just wants to be on that front plane. You can see that, how that's drawn that on that front plane, reference to the origin point. Now I want to tell Fusion that this front part of our drawer is always going to be exactly the same size as the drawer unit that it sits inside of. Does that make sense? And to do that we can use constraints. Now just to recap, a constraint allows us to define a relationship between one component, face, line, object with another one. Now we know that we can size this and put dimensions in, but that's no good to us because I've no standard parameters that will define this opening. So I'm going to come along and I'm going to use a constraint here that's called the collinear constraint. It constrains two or more objects so that they share a common line. This can be a line, it can be a rectangle, where the lines and one edge of the rectangle lie along the same line. So let's use a constraint command, and I want the bottom of my drawer front to sit on the bottom plane there. And now you can see the line's gone black, and that's now constrained it to that bottom line. I'm still in the collinear tool. You can see on my cursor I've still got those two little lines and indicating collinear. Click on the left edge, bang, click on there, click on the top and click on there. And now what I've got, if I finish the sketch, now you can now see, just hovering my mouse over that, you can see I've got this nice blue opaque window here that's sized and constrained to that drawer opening. And those constraints are enough to always force this to resize. Now let's turn this into a panel, give it some thickness. So we're going to come in and use the extrude command, which is either E on the keyboard or the extrude block at the top. We want to extrude this, so we select that. And I want to move it into the cupboard, because the way these drawers are constructed, there'll be a box inside that's got some dovetail joinery, and then we'll put a false front on this. This comes in by the stock thickness. Now don't forget, we want to make it a new component, so a new component down here. Okay, now let's just rename that so we know what we're doing. New component, and I'm going to call this small drawer left front. So what we now have is this front panel, and that's constrained by the drawer opening that it sits inside of, which makes perfect sense. So in theory, as I resize the bookcase here, these constraints would stay in place, and this will resize as this panel, as this hole the drawer sits inside resizes. So let's just try that and see whether that works or not. So let's change this to something stupid like, I don't know, 2 meters high. Let's change it to a length of 5 meters, and let's change the stock thickness to 50. Wow, that's thick. And okay that. And you can see that that has now resized quite happily there. So yeah, we know that that works, and that makes perfect sense because that front panel is constrained by these 4 edges, so it will always equal those 4 edges. Now that gives me another problem, of course, because that is a super tight fit, and if you're a woodworker, you know that drawer will never work. It'll get stuck inside that, you'll be fighting it all the time, and it'll be poor design. So we actually want to put an offset around this. The bottom will always run on this bottom panel here, that's the design of this drawer, but I don't want this to be a tight fit. I want this step back by a little bit. So I want to put a 0.5mm gap around there, there, and there. So when I do the final dimensions of the drawing, I allow for that in the construction of this front panel. So I'm just going to reset the dimensions, Control and Z, just to undo those dimension changes. So last week we learned a new command, go into small drawer left front, right click, and we can now use isolate to turn everything else off apart from that panel. So we know we want to work on this face, and this face, just to make that smaller. And we've got a command that does that, the offset face. Now this shifts the selected face or faces in a positive or negative direction. And it's doing that shift from a known point, in our case a constrained line. So let's click on the offset command. Offset faces, what do you want to offset? I want to offset that edge, top, and that edge. And if I now drag the arrow and push that in because we want it to be smaller, you can see I need to put a negative value inside here, and the negative value is minus 0.5mm in our case. And if I now bring the bookcase back, right click on the small drawer left front and unisolate, you can now see I have that gap all the way around I'm looking for. Now although it doesn't look like it now, this panel is still constrained by those 4 edges, because what the offset command does, it offsets from a known position. So we constrain this to the opening inside the bookcase, and then offset from that constraint by 0.5 millimeters, but it's still constrained. So if I now come back in and prove that to you, and we'll change the height once again to 2 meters, we'll change the length to 5 meters. Okay, you can see that panel has resized again, but I still have my 0.5 millimeter offset. Now that took me quite a while to work out, but everything is now constrained. Perfect. So now we've got this done, let's go ahead and make the other components for our drawer. So we're going to right click on the small drawer again, and I'm going to isolate that. Now I can now use this as my reference piece. We know this is going to resize, so I can just anchor everything now to this piece. So we're going to come in with another sketch. We all start with a sketch, and this time I want to sketch on this on this right edge here. Sketch. And I'm just going to draw somewhere, anywhere, a random rectangle. Couldn't care less what size it is or where it is. And I'm going to use the constraint commands once again to tie this panel into this panel. So come into the collinear, select the front edge. Now we're going to be doing dovetails, and we all know that dovetailed pieces would overlap. So I want this piece to be the full thickness of this front drawer here. There. I want this piece to be constrained to the top of the drawer, and I want this bottom piece to be constrained to the bottom of the drawer. So that's now constrained on 3 sides, and as this front panel resizes, this will also resize in line with those constraints. And because we did that offset of this front piece, this will also have that 0.5 millimeter clearance gap throughout the drawer. Happy days. Now we need to look at the back of this here, and I do want to give that a dimension. So I'm going to come into my sketch dimensions tool at the top here, click on that top line and raise it up, and I'm going to call this the bookcase width. Now remember, on our bookcase we put a back panel on here that was 12 millimeters thick, and that's set. No matter how big this bookcase goes, my back panel will always be 12 millimeters thick. So I'm going to take away from my bookcase width 15, so it allows that back panel and gives me a bit of clearance there in the back of the bookcase. Bosh. So that gives me my distance of 250, and as my bookcase width resizes, that will always resize as well, and will always be 15 millimeters from the back. So I can now finish the sketch. So now we're going to give this some thickness. Come up to the create command, select the extrude command, or press E on your keyboard. We want this to be a new component. So let's select what we want to extrude. Well, it's that face. Now as always, it's missed out that part where the intersect line is, so remember to select that as well. And now drag the arrow in the direction. And you can see this now wants a negative number. It says -20 at the moment. If I dragged it the other way, it wants a positive number. And very often I type in there just stock thickness, forgetting the negative number, and it sticks out from the drawer, not in. So minus stock thickness, and then okay, we now get a new component down here, and you can see that those two boards are intersecting. And if you've made dovetails in the past, you know that's exactly how you would size that board. So we're in reasonably good shape there, I think. Okay, let's give this a name. I'm going to call this one small drawer side left. Okay, so I now want to create my second side of the drawer, and that's exactly the same technique. So we spin round, we go to sketch. I want to sketch on this edge. I'm going to put a random rectangle in the middle, and I'm going to constrain that using the collinear constraint. So my front's going to constrain to there, my top's going to constrain to there, and my bottom's going to constrain to there. Now this piece here, I can actually constrain to that back edge because it's already got the dimension in, and as the drawer resizes, everything will resize quite happily. So good shape. Now we can extrude that, so just shortcut E on the keyboard. I want to extrude to a new component. I want to extrude that piece and that piece, and I want to push it in. So again, I need a minus number, and we know it's minus stock thickness. Bang. And now I've got another component. You can see that I've got the right hand side of my, actually that should have been side draw right, shouldn't it, not left. Got myself confused. Right, now this one is going to be the small draw side left. Bang. Now I know I'm going to get a question, why didn't I just copy and paste that? Well, the copy and paste command would have made an exact replica of this, and inside I want to put a rebate here to take the draw bottom. So if that was a direct copy and I cut a rebate here, it would appear on this outside of the draw, so I don't really want to do that. You could have used copy and pasted a new component, but I find that very often the relationship goes wrong if you do that, and as you resize the draw in multiple ways, it can lose its position, not only in relationship to the drawer but in relationship to the book cabinet. So I just find this a very easier and safer way to make sure all my resizing works. Okay, and now I need to put it back in the drawer, so let's spin around to the back. Let's go into our sketch onto this back of the drawer. Now this is super easy. All I now need to do is to constrain this to the back of the drawer. So I'll come from the collinear constraint. I want to constrain to the top, I want to constrain to that edge, I want to constrain to the bottom, and I want to constrain to that edge as well. Now that's locked all my draw together. E on the keyboard to extrude, select the thing we want to extrude, plus the missing piece it always leaves out. We're going to push that in, so I know I now need a minus figure, and it's going to be minus stock thickness, and I know I want it to be a new component. Bang. So there we go. We've now got the basics of a drawer. Let's give this a name. Small drawer left back. I've just renamed those because the convention was getting a bit messy. So I've now got a small drawer front, a small drawer side on the right, a small drawer side on the left, and a small drawer back. So I've just renamed those. Happy days. Now let's come back in and unisolate everything else. Remember, we're working from the front, so right click on the front, unisolate, and our cabinet now comes back, and you can see that our drawer is fitting in there reasonably well. Let's check our constraints are working. So let's make this 3,000 millimeters high. Let's make it slow today, Fusion, 700 millimeters thick for a laugh. Let's make this one, I don't know, 6 meters long. Oops, that's it. 6 meters long, and let's make the start 25 millimeters thick. Okay. And you can see all that's resized, and if I was just to turn everything off for 1 second, you can see that's resized perfectly as we would expect it to. Happy days. Now the next thing I want to do is to put in place the drawer bottom. I'm going to create a new constraint, and we'll just set this one, I think, to 12 millimeters. Should be thick enough, I think, for that base. This is the thickness of the drawer base. Okay, cool. Now I want to isolate everything again, so come back to the small drawer front, isolate, and then just turn the rest of the drawer on. What we want to do now is to create a drawer bottom in here, and we know we want it to be rebated into the side. So we're going to come in to the base of the drawer, and I'm going to create a sketch. And we're going to use exactly the same technique, coming with a rectangle, a random rectangle, and I want to constrain this to the inside edge of this drawer. So go into the collinear constraint, click on the top, click on that edge, click on there, click on that edge, click on there, click on that edge, click on there, and click on that edge. And that's now created a drawer bottom that's constrained to the inside of the drawer. And we know we can resize this by using the offset tool, which is absolutely perfect. So we're going to finish the sketch, So I now want to extrude this up, but I want to just talk through a little something first of all. I always want this drawer to be referenced to this base, but I don't want it sat on the base. So I want to find a way of offsetting this in some way, shape or form. There's a few ways we can do that. We can use construction planes and other ways, but let's look at a really super simple way. I'm going to extrude this, but the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to extrude it up by the base thickness, that 12mm parameter we've just set, plus 10mm, which is the offset I want from the base. Let me show you. Click on your extrude command, click on the thing you want to extrude, which is the base panel, and push it up. So I want this to come up by, and it's a minus quantity, minus the stock, minus the drawer bottom plus 10. Now what that'll do is give me a super thick 22mm in this case bottom, and remember we want to create a new component. Bang. We're going to call this now the small drawer bottom. Now we've got a super thick base inside here. We know that's 10mm too thick, so guess what I can do? I'm going to offset it. I'm going to go into modify, I'm going to offset. I want to offset this base panel and I want to push that up by 10mm, minus 10mm. So that now gives me a base that's 12mm thick in the bottom of our drawer here, that's constrained by these 4 sides, so it will always be the right size, and it's constrained by this bottom face but offset by 10mm. So that base will always be 10mm from the bottom of our drawer and always be the right size for the drawer. And that's a super quick technique I find of actually doing that and making things resized. So let's just work on the drawer bottom. Let's isolate the drawer bottom. Isolate. So I want this to stick into my sides by 1/3 of the stock thickness, and we know we've got a parameter called joinery that does that very thing for us. So let's come to modify again. Let's come to the offset faces, and I want to offset that face, that face, that face, and that face, and I want to make this bigger by the joinery. And remember, joinery is a parameter, stock thickness divided by 3, 1/3 of the stock, which is perfect. Dunk, and then press OK. So bring back in the rest of the drawer, and if I hover on the bottom, you can just see that shadow line appearing inside the drawer there that says, yep, that's bigger than we need it to be. So guess what we do now? I now want to cut the rebate, and to do that I use my old friend the modify tool. Underneath modify we have this combine tool. Performs Boolean operations between solid bodies. Select the target body and then select one or more tool bodies to perform a join, a cut or intersect operation on the target, and it's the cut that we're interested in. Now this is the command I had feedback I went too quickly, so let's slow this right down again. First thing we do is we come along and we select the tool, combine tool, and it brings up our menu. Now a target body is the thing that we want to cut into. Remember I call this the router tool. This is the thing that we want to route the rebate into. The target body is the thing we want to cut. The tool body is the thing that we want to use to make the cut. That's the router bit. And the operation, you can either join things together, you can cut them, or you can create an intersect point, and we're interested in the cut command, so we're going to cut. My target body is going to be any one of these edges. Let's pick this one here. My tool body is going to be the base, because I want that base to cut into that side panel to make the rebate. Select. I want to keep the tool, I don't want to lose a draw base after we spent so long making it, so we click the keep tool and OK. Now that's put that rebate inside there. This is the small draw back, so let's just turn everything else off for a second and look at the small draw back, and there you can see it. And that's given me that perfect rebate that we can only dream of making with our woodworking tools in that drawer. Fantastic. Actually stopped rebate, blind rebate, I think. Perfect. So let's now do the other sides in the same way. So just so I don't get confused, I'm just going to turn off the one I've done, so I'm turning off the small draw back there. Okay, now I'll come back to modify again, select my combine tool, or right click on your mouse and you can reuse the short command, that repeat combine here. Same thing, gets you to the same place. My target body is going to be this side. The tool body, the router bit, is going to be the base. It's remembered that I'm using cut commands, and it's remembered I want to keep the tools, which is great, but always check that. Okay. We now need to do this back piece. Right click, repeat combine. My target body is that back panel. My router bit, my tool body, is the base panel. I want to cut and I want to keep the tool. Click. Right click, repeat combine. My target body is that side panel. My tool body is my base panel. My operation is cut and I'm keeping the tool. Okay, bang. And now I bring that back in there, I've now got pretty much the basics of the drawer. Turn off the small drawer bottom. And you see that? I've got a beautiful rebate all the way around inside that drawer, which is pretty much what we want. Happy days. So we now bring everything back inside our unit. Now I want to treat this drawer as a subassembly, so I'm going to come in and to make a subassembly out of this lot now. I'm going to right click here on the top, bookcase design, and I'm going to click on new component, and that gives me a new component. There's nothing inside that component, but it gives me a new component. And I'm going to call this one the small drawer left. And I want to drag these parts, so I want the front, I want the right panel, the left panel, the back panel, and the bottom panel. I'm just going to drag those down into that component. And now I've got a single drawer component that we can manipulate. Happy days. So that's it for today. We've learned an awful lot about those constraint commands today and how important they are when we're using parametric modeling. Because to try and define that drawer using dimensions would have been incredibly different, because we'd have to use maths and all sorts of complicated equations to actually resize that as the bookcase resize. But those constraints made it super fast and easy. And once we've got that framework of the bookcase that can scale using the very, very few parameters, to be fair, we've actually used, and we constrain to that bookcase, and everything's going to work out really, really well. Now next week I want to look at dovetails on this drawer, and we're going to put blind dovetails on the front and through dovetails on the back. I'll see you next time on the Fusion 360 for Woodworkers course.